Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm the content creator for visionandprophecy.com. If you've ever asked, where are we in God's prophetic timeline, then this study is for you. In this video, I want to talk about one of the most intriguing patterns in biblical prophecy and the thing that sparked intense end times research for me, which is the concept of the Millennial Days. This is the idea that Scripture lays out a 7,000-year timeline of human history, 6,000 years of labor, struggle, and sin from creation to present day, followed by a 7th 1,000-year period, a Sabbath rest under the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. In this video, I'll explore the Millennial Days and its supporting scripture. I'll show the prevalent pattern of sevens that's connected throughout the Bible and also connected to biblical prophetic timing. And I'll show how these two concepts connect with the historical record. So first, let's establish what a millennial day is. The millennial day theory gets its origin from a couple of verses, starting in Psalm 90, verse 4, which says, 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or like a watch in the night. Now, Jewish tradition is that the Psalms are considered poetic, and they're often dismissed for that reason as allegorical. But it's my opinion that this verse and other Psalms should be taken literally, and in many cases prophetically. And 2 Peter seems to echo this idea. In 2 Peter 3, verse 8, Peter emphasizes this concept by saying, "Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." So Peter is emphasizing in this verse, in a literal sense, that God's perspective is that a day should be likened to 1,000 years, and 1,000 years likewise should be likened to a day. Because of his emphasis, I think that we should give this concept special consideration and even consider taking it literally. Could we find some confirmation of this in the biblical text? And the answer to that question is yes. In Genesis 2, starting in verse 16, God tells Adam, "You may eat from any tree in the Garden of Eden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For on the day that you eat from it, you will surely die." Now, it's true that Adam's decision was a sin, and the wages of sin is death, and therefore Adam died spiritually, in that he was without sin, and then he made this choice and is with sin, and therefore guilty in the presence of the benevolent God, and also deserving of judgment and punishment, which has already been communicated to him, is death. But Adam doesn't physically die the day that he eats of the fruit. Instead, we see in Genesis 5:5 that Adam lived 930 years, which is 70 years short of 1,000. So while Adam didn't die on the 24-hour period that he disobeyed, he did die within the millennial day. That is the 1,000-year period in which he made his choice. So God's promise of death in that day takes on a spiritual and physical significance. And it's the physical significance that aligns with the millennial day theory. I'll point out too that this is an example where sometimes God says things that mean more than one thing. They can both be true in the same instance. But that's for another video. In this instance, what I want to indicate is that the millennial days, each representing 1,000 years, they give us a lens to see human history. Now, let me connect this concept with the pattern of sevens in the Bible. One of the strongest recurring themes in Scripture is the number 7. In Genesis 1 and 2, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th. He consecrated the 7th day, and he made it holy. Now, an all-powerful God doesn't need rest. Instead, I believe he was establishing a biblical pattern from the very beginning, one that has prophetic significance. A little later in the Bible, God provides his laws to live by to the Hebrews. He further emphasizes the importance of sevens and connects it to the way he wants his people to measure time. Found in Exodus 20, God is giving the Ten Commandments, and in verse 8 we see that they include the command for the chosen people to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And this is directly tied to the creation pattern that God has established in Genesis 2. In Leviticus 23:3, he reinforces the establishment of the weekly Sabbath pattern of 7 days. He then goes on to establish 7 annual feasts of the Lord with observances that are demonstrably prophetic. Now, I mentioned the feasts in a previous video, and we'll likely cover them in more depth in a later video, but for now, this is more support for God establishing a pattern of sevens in association with measuring time. Another often overlooked but big example is Leviticus 25, where God introduces additional prophetic time measurement law that the chosen people are expected to follow. This time they're told that when they enter the promised land, they're to begin counting the years in sets of 7, called sabbatical years. That's one set of 7 years or a week of years. Then they're told that in addition to counting these sabbatical years, they're to count sets of sabbatical years in sevens, which produces 49 years total. That is, they should count sets of 7 sevens, which are known as Jubilee cycles. The people are told that the observance of this practice should include that every 7th year the land rests from all agricultural practices, and after 7 cycles of 7 years, 49 years total, when they begin a new cycle, the first year is also the 50th year of the previous set, and it's to be a celebratory year known as a Jubilee. So that was a lot. Let me recap. This is God telling his people, count years in sets of 7, and also count 7 sets for 49 years total. And this set of 49 years is considered a sabbatical Jubilee cycle. And the 50th year is the first year of the next set. That 50th year is also a Jubilee, which is associated with celebration and additional rest, and it's why we call it the Jubilee cycle. You're counting sets of 49, but you're looking for the 50th year, the beginning of the next set. This isn't just God giving support for the pattern of sevens, but it's also God giving the chosen people a methodology of counting the years with a prophetic significance that a great celebration is coming at the end. And it's logical then to think that perhaps a greater level of significance is found in some multiple of 7 Jubilees cycles. And this is exactly the correlation that we see with the Millennial Day theory. Now, in 1446 BC, the Jewish people exited Egypt from slavery. They were saved, and this story is referred to as the Exodus. And after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the people enter the promised land that God has prepared for them in 1406 BC. And it's this entrance into the promised land that God highlighted in Leviticus 25 to begin counting the Jubilees. So, if we count Jubilees from 1406 to present day, we find it's 70 Jubilees, 3,430 years, and that takes us directly to 2025. And obviously it's significant, first of all, because that's the year that we're in right now. But there's more significance here in that we're 7 years removed from 2032, which is 2,000 years from the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. 2,000 years, 2 millennial days. So we find ourselves in a period of time where these 2 prophetic counting methodologies intersect. And I highlight this because this counting method of Jubilee cycles appears to be God telling the Jewish people to count years in a specific way that counts up to what appears to have 2 witnesses of being a very significant period of time. I'll highlight more on the potential prophetic significance of 2025 and 2032 in a moment, but for now, I'd like to continue establishing the pattern of prophetic sevens a little bit further. So I'll move to Daniel 9. Daniel 9 contains a prophecy that's given to him by an angel, and the angel tells him that 70 weeks of years have been decreed for God's chosen people. And clearly, this aligns with the Jubilee counting that we were just speaking of, but in the prophecy of Daniel 9, he's told to count 70 weeks. We just counted 70 Jubilees. But Daniel's 70 weeks were 490 years, and the prophecy goes on to tell him that the count will lead to an anointed one who will be cut off. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that this 490 years that the angel was speaking of, 490 prophetic years, leads directly to the crucifixion week of Jesus Christ. In the final verse, Daniel is told that the 70th week of this prophecy will involve a 7-year peace treaty which has not yet occurred. And I'll explain the reason for the delay between the 69th and the 70th week a little later. Another example of prophetic sevens throughout the Bible is the book of Revelation, which is absolutely overflowing with sevens. 7 letters to the 7 churches, which are also called 7 lampstands, as well as a scroll of judgment with 7 seals, then 7 trumpets and 7 bowls associated with an end times prophetic 7-year period of judgment on the earth, known as the tribulation period. This period, by the way, is the 70th week from Daniel 9. Finally, the 7th millennial day is also revealed in Revelation 20 to be a 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ on earth. And all of this confirms the divine blueprint of various levels of sevens that God has designed and communicated to his chosen people throughout the Bible. Now, I found this concept so compelling that I did the math. When we trace biblical genealogies and historical markers, the timeline adds up. Starting with the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ found in Revelation 20, which I just mentioned, we can count backwards 1,000 years to get to 2032. Now, I'm assuming, of course, that this 1,000-year reign is starting in 2032, so I don't expect this part to be convincing to you yet. But then we'll take the 7 years away from that 2025 to get to our current year, and that 7-year period is the tribulation period. But from 2032, if we go backwards 2,000 years, as I've already mentioned, we'll get to the crucifixion of Jesus. And if we go back 1,000 years again, we get to the end of King David's reign and the beginning of King Solomon's reign. If we go back another 1,000 years, we've covered the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt, as well as the life and lineage of Abraham, who receives multiple significant prophetic promises from God. And then from there, it's 2,000 years, including the establishment of the nations and languages of the world, a major flood event, and mankind expanding in population and sin, all the way back to Adam in creation. And these years are confirmed by the genealogies provided in Genesis 5 and 11. Adding all of these things up, we arrive at 7,000 years from creation to what seems to include everything the Bible communicates. This is what I found so compelling about the Millennial Day theory. It seems to fit perfectly, and it aligns with the biblical patterns that I previously established. Now let me show you everything I've presented put together and a little bit more scriptural support. Here's where it gets really compelling. We're now nearly 2,000 years after the crucifixion. 2025 is specifically 7 years short of the 2,000-year anniversary of the crucifixion. That means that we are living at the end of the 6th millennial day, and we're on the threshold of the 7th millennial day, which should be a Sabbath rest. This also aligns with the 70 Jubilee cycles being completed in 2025 from 1406, when the Israelites entered the Promised Land. This indicates the counting methodology God provided in Exodus was to instruct the Jewish people how to count the days to the establishment of the millennial reign, which is a fulfillment of prophecies made to Abraham. The Jubilee counting also correlates to the anticipated celebratory end and fulfillment of the prophetic nature of the Jubilee cycle, with Christ's reign established on earth and Satan bound for 1,000 years. Several key scriptures reinforce this 7,000-year timeline approach. First, Hosea 6:2 tells us, "After 2 days he will revive us, on the third day he will raise us up." 2 references to days. And this prophetic piece of scripture is alluding to another pattern that is prevalent throughout the Bible of being raised on the third day. Viewed through the lens of Millennial Days, this is saying after 2,000 years, Israel would be revived. And we see that it was. It was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And in 1948, 2 millennial days later, it was raised up. It's reestablished. But it has not yet been fully raised up, which will happen on the third day, the millennial reign, when the promises that were made to Abraham are fulfilled. And it's that expectation that we look for after the 7-year tribulation period is completed. Next, we see the same pattern in Exodus 19, where Israel agrees to a relationship with God, and Moses is told to begin consecrating the people for 2 days. After the 2 days, they would then meet God on the third day. Again, 2 days, and then raised on the third. This is foreshadowing 2 levels of significance. First, the relationship with God and the Jewish people begins in the 3rd millennial day, and their consecration for the next 2 days and the establishment of the Messiah's kingdom would have been on time to begin at the end of the 4th millennial day, when Jesus the Messiah presented himself fulfilling messianic prophecy in Jerusalem. Instead, the people rejected the Messiah and killed him. And at that point, even though the intention wasn't fulfilled, the pattern repeats, because we see that even when Jesus is killed, he's buried, and on the third day, he's raised up, resurrected from the dead. Now, we learn in Romans 11, verse 25, that with the rejection of the Messiah, a, quote, partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. This verse means God has stopped the 2-day consecration, third day meet God process that was communicated to Moses as a foreshadowing microcosm. Instead, the Jews have been put on pause, which is the delay that we see in Daniel 9's 70th week. They went 69 prophetic weeks, the Messiah presented himself, and the 70th week should have commenced, but instead, it didn't, because the Messiah was rejected. And so then what we see with this verse in Romans 11:25 is that God has put the process on pause and included a new group of people, the Gentiles. The Gentiles are seemingly now given 2 millennial days to be consecrated. These 2 millennial days are the 2,000 years between the crucifixion and our current day, and it's commonly referred to as the church age. And I'll add as a brief side note that the 7 letters to the 7 churches that I mentioned earlier in Revelation 2 and 3, those foreshadow the development of the church through the church age and are prophetic of the timing of another major event called the rapture. I won't cover the rapture in this video, but I intend to in a new video at a later time. I want to cover the concept too of the letters to the 7 churches and how that foreshadows the development of the church. I'll aim to add that in another video at a later time, and I'll add the link to the end of this video once it's complete. For now, though, just know that the 2 millennial day church age also finds prophetic and historic support in the scripture. One final note here in regards to the Jubilees at the bottom. I show first that the 70 Jubilees occur from when Israel enters the Promised Land to our present day. This is in line with where God said to begin counting, But as you can see, I went ahead and I looked to see what might happen if I were to extend the Jubilee count further in either direction. And it looks to have some potential, though I readily admit that this is completely speculative. It looks as though if the Jubilee count is extended, we're left with two remainders, one on either end. The remainder near the creation might be the time between the actual creation event and the event of the first sin, as a length of time for this period is debated by biblical scholars. Likewise, on the other end, we read in Revelation 20, verse 7 through 15, that Satan must be released one final time at the end. But it doesn't give a specific amount of time. Perhaps these two remainders give the answer to what those timelines look like. And then I'll point out that more significance is potentially found in the number of Jubilees that result from this process. It's 144 Jubilees total, which is 12 times 12 times 7 times 7. And like the number 7, 12 is also a repeated number in the Bible that holds some symbolic significance. So perhaps this is where the two patterns converge, with 12 12s of 7 7s. But again, that's just speculative, but I think it's intriguing enough to share it. In closing, what do the Millennial Days teach us? They show us that the Bible's prophetic timeline is precise and intentional. 6 days or 6,000 years for mankind's sin, labor, and history. A 7th day or 1,000 years for the millennial reign of Christ, the Sabbath rest. Patterns of sevens in creation, law, prophecy, and revelation all testify to this design. And the historical records from the Bible confirm 4,000 years from creation to cross, and nearly 2,000 years since points us directly to this year and 7 years from now. And then ultimately, it directs us to the 7th millennial day. This also shows that our omniscient God knew the events of history before they began. He knew the time to develop the nation of Israel would lead to rejection, and that there would be a subsequent development of the church. This all fits into the patterned design of 7 he communicated from the very beginning. So, if this theory is true, and it seems to be supported through the Bible, then we are living at the end of the 6th millennial day, on the very doorstep of Christ's return. The question isn't if God's prophetic timeline will be fulfilled, it's when. And by all accounts, it appears to be soon. So, thank you for watching. If this teaching has blessed you, please subscribe, share the video, join me as we continue exploring the amazing patterns of biblical prophecy and the hope of the second coming of Jesus Christ.